Welcome to TA Therapy Ain't Just White, the podcast where therapy meets real talk, representation, and the beautiful chaos of being human. You'll be hearing from 4 transactional analysis trainees from marginalized backgrounds, sharing their journey through training, theory, and life. Whether you're curious about therapy, already into TA, or just want honest conversations about identity and growth, this space is for you. They are here to make psychotherapy more human, more honest, and more inclusive. Let's dive in.
Hello and welcome back to TA Therapy Ain't Just White. This week we are talking about the 3 philosophical principles that underpin TA. But before we get into that, just a little bit of housekeeping. So there's just the 3 of us on today's show. Craig, unfortunately, is a bit under the weather, can't join us today, so we send him our love and support to get well soon. We miss you, Craig. Just a bit of a recap on last time. So last time we talked about ego state theory, and so we're building on that now, looking into those kind of founding principles, and looking at how looking at those through a cultural lens, through our own experiences, and just kind of bringing those to life a little bit more. So this is something, trying to keep it relevant to our current times, and just a bit of a discussion about, do they need revising or developing, or how do we feel about these principles as we go. So I'll hand over to Wendy, I think, to kind of introduce the principles and start to take us through.
Okay, great. So there are 3, as Mike said, basic philosophical principles, kind of like the underpinnings of TA, really, that relate to how we think about people and relationships, and also the concept of change. I guess they're kind of the TA core beliefs. So the 3 are: people are okay. He has the capacity to think. People decide their own destiny, and that these decisions can be changed. I'm thinking it would be a good idea to go through them one by one and talk about it. How does that sound, guys?
Yeah, sounds good.
Up for that.
Okay, then. So let's get started. People are okay. So at our core, everybody has value, dignity, worth, and as a result, they should be treated with dignity and respect. So this philosophy sort of embodies the idea of equality. And one of the things that I really liked about this is the idea that the client and the therapist are equal. They're equally okay. And so it's one of mutual respect. And I don't know if that's necessarily true in all modalities. So TA, as we've discussed previously, is about relationships. So in TA, the therapist is not assumed to have more knowledge or insight than the client. And I think that this comes out a lot in the ideas around TA and contracting. It also reminds me of this poem, I don't know if anyone knows it, by the late rapper Tupac Shakur, "The Rose That Grew from the Crack in the Concrete." So, maybe we'll do a bit of spoken word later. But in this poem, Tupac is challenging us. He's sort of challenging us to notice and celebrate things of beauty. In this case, it's a rose that, despite all the odds and being overlooked by most people, is still able to grow in the worst of environments. And he's talking about like people like him in the projects. So without any nurturing or nourishment from anyone else, there's something of beauty. And I think, it's very similar to what Bern is talking about. He's not necessarily talking about behavior, but that there's this sort of, I guess, essence of goodness that is in all of us. So, Robyn, would it be okay to start with you on this one?
Yeah.
Okay. So you shared a little bit already about where you grew up, and that you grew up in apartheid. So I'm just wondering, how does this belief that people are okay resonate with you? And just in case everyone's not aware, can you tell us a little bit about apartheid and what it was?
Yeah, so apartheid was a set of laws and it basically legalized prejudice. It was a system of law that came about in 1948 until the early 90s, and it was enforced through a few laws. One of them was called the Population Registration Act, which means everybody was classified according to their race. We had the Group Areas Act, which means people of a specific racial group were forced to live in a specific area. We had the pass laws, where people of color had to have an additional identity document if they were in areas outside the areas they were allowed to live and work. We had the Bantu Education Act, which was it basically was the education system for people of color, and it was different from people who were white. We had the Separate Representation of Voters Act, which gave or restricted people's rights to vote. So in TA terms, the idea of I'm okay, you're okay in this system of government, people of color were not okay, and people who were white were seen as okay. And it was a message that's passed on. So it was a cultural message, it was a message in the broader country, but it also then was personalized. And because each racial group was given different privileges, each one was seen to be a little bit better than the other. So not only are you not okay, but you're a little bit more okay than a different racial group.
So more of a I'm okay, but you're not okay position.
Yeah. And then something that sort of came up in my own journey is understanding the concept of I'm okay and you're okay means I must feel that I'm okay. And it's something that's, because of my experience, is something that I'm working towards. It's not something that I feel has happened automatically. So I'm having to work through loads of societal messages I received as a child and a young adult. And by the time I was finished with my formal education, that was when Nelson Mandela was released from prison, and he became the first Black president. So it was a time of extreme hope and optimism from coming from this position of he's not okay to he's now the president. And it felt like for me, it happened overnight, really. So there was a lot of optimism and people were hopeful for change.
Okay. So it's interesting how, at one time you were talking about Mandela because, he was labeled as a terrorist by the government. And I think, because he was labeled as a terrorist, he wasn't allowed to visit some countries, but how that shifted after he went to prison and, became president and is now, I think, like universally almost revered. So it makes me think about this idea of who is okay and who is considered not okay, how it's sort of tied to this social, political and structural, construct. And also picking up on what you just said, Robyn, about how it's something that you have to work towards. It's not something that's static.
Yeah.
Yeah. And last week, Mike, you were talking a little bit about othering, and you said that you grew up in a Caribbean and Jewish household. Just as we're talking about how things change, but now through like marriage and family, it's evolved into a broader multicultural family, actually. So I'm really interested to hear like your very unique perspective on this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a lot of what kind of Robyn shared there really kind of struck me and really spoke to me, about in different situations, different groups being seen as okay or not okay, but then within their own situations, that changes. It's that perspective depending on the situation. And I think I kind of look at my own cultural mix, like historically and kind of where I am now. And, there's a lot of, as historically, when I look back at the kind of intergenerational piece, lots of fear of being othered on both kind of main branches of my family. So through the kind of the Caribbean side and then through the Jewish side as well, just continually being on alert in kind of wider situations of being viewed as not okay, being viewed as one down, being viewed as less than by wider society. And and I think about, and I'm working through now, and probably similar way to Robyn, to kind of touch on there, that there's historical elements that I'm only kind of becoming aware of through my TA journey as I go through these things. That I'm thinking about how much of my anxiety, how much of my thought patterns and processes are actually my stuff, and how much of it is cultural that's handed down to me, and how much of that do I need to keep hold of, and how much actually do I need to be cognizant of and be aware of, but not necessarily governed by, and those kind of elements. I think TA really helps with building some of that awareness and giving a language to be able to talk about it. And when I think about the concept of okayness, and as you said, Wendy, for me it's certainly that every human being has an inherent worth and dignity, but that doesn't necessarily, well, it absolutely doesn't excuse behaviors and things like that. But it's, there's a kernel of something in there that, for me, okayness is about curiosity, is about not taking on face value what's presented, asking the questions about, well, what kind of led to this position here? Why do I think and feel how I think and feel, and why do you think and feel and act how you think and feel and act? And promoting a dialogue, I think, between that, but still holding that, the very core, we are all individuals, but we are all okay from that kind of little human point of view. But that can be really difficult when you're trying to fit in with different cultural traditions and rituals in one sense, but then trying not to stand out in wider society and then be othered or scapegoated and things like that because of the traditions and cultures that you're holding on the other side. So it's really, I find it quite a challenging thing to balance in myself, but then also to hold other people in that kind of okay space. It's a conscious thought process, but it's it's a muscle to be flexed and to be worked on, I think.
Yeah, I really like that muscle idea. It's definitely something you have to work at. It's not necessarily easy. Coming from a dual heritage family myself, I can definitely relate to that othering and that straggling the two societies and trying to figure out where you fit. But also, like, there's the third one, like you mentioned about your community. You're also trying to fit in the two cultures, but also the wider society. I'm just thinking about that, that one of the comments about the whole Black Lives Matter movement was when people sort of questioned it and said, well, all lives matter. And it's like, but that's the whole point. That's why Black Lives Matter, because they haven't mattered in the past, and that's why we have to bring it up. So it's pretty difficult sometimes, but I think, like what you've both said, is it's something that we have to strive towards, and I think that's something that we have to hold on to. That's such a rich conversation. We could probably spend the whole podcast talking about that, but if we want to get through the principles, unfortunately, we're going to have to move on to our next one. So our next one is that everybody has the capacity to think for themselves. So this concept is the idea that, all people can think and therefore make sense of the world. And in TA, this is why it's sort of, sometimes you'll hear it described as a decision model. So even though we're born into certain circumstances as a baby, and our parents and society put pressure on us, is the child that chooses which path to take. So one of the goals in TA therapy is for the clients to grow their adult, so that their thinking and their decision making is free of any past contaminations. And by that, we mean like the influences from the past. I don't know about you guys, but this is the one that I struggled with the most.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a great idea in theory. That's my first view of it. It sounds like a great thing to strive towards. It sounds like a fantastic concept. But my struggle with thinking, and because of my experience, is that it sounds again like something that's done by the individual. It's a very Western view. You thinking is something you go to a school, you get taught all these ideas and concepts, and it's all very it's accessible to everybody. But obviously my experience was different. My education was different because that was the law at the time. So my view of my own intelligence is also as a result skewed. I also realized that wisdom, thinking, intelligence is a concept, a Western construct, and it's when the way it's thought of in a Western society is very different. The idea of an intelligent test has come under a lot of controversy because it tests a certain kind of intelligence that is gained from a Western way of thinking. Other communities have their intelligence is a lot more practical, or it's based on experience, it's transferred via stories or modeling. So even the idea of the way intelligence is measured, or the idea of what thinking is different in different contexts. So yes, everybody can think, but thinking and intelligence, I suppose, is two different things. It's two different, something that I struggle with a little bit, because I think the idea of intelligence is very, I don't know, it's different from what I have experienced in my view of it. So the TA principle is that everybody can think, but thinking shouldn't just be limited to book learning. It should include wisdom, intuition, experience, and cultural knowledge.
Yeah, I think like what you're saying is maybe like the idea of intelligence tests are a very narrow way of measuring people's ability, aren't they? Unfortunately, that's what schools tend to do. I'm just thinking about a school that I was working in, actually, an inner city school, and we had a new principal who had done a lot of amazing work, who'd taken over the school, and he talked about the power of the pen. And at the time I thought, what is he talking about? But what he was talking about is sort of really what you were alluding to, Robyn. As teachers, we have, such power because I'm reading an essay, and you've got maybe a rubric to grade that essay. But that difference between maybe even half a point could be the difference between someone passing and failing. And it's their ability is tied to that one test. That person may not graduate high school, therefore they may not get a job, they may not have any money. Then what are they going to do? It impacts your whole life. So I'm just thinking about what you were talking about, how people's worth is tied up with a test that we now know a lot of the research has been debunked. And I think there's even been papers written about how a lot of the research was actually fabricated and actually somewhat even would say was racist. So it's a great point to bring up. And adding to that, I think I used to think that I was being very adult when I was rationalizing about people who said and did racist things or cruel, evil, or hurtful things. I used to think like, oh, well, they're not really thinking. I would even use the word ignorant as an excuse for their behavior because I didn't really want to accept that this was what they really thought. I was thinking about this speech as well by the great African-American abolitionist and statesman, Frederick Douglass, and this was in 1852. And he was talking to a group of slaves, really. And it's a famous speech because it was on America's holiday. And he's saying to them, what to the slave is the 4th of July? And he's talking about how the Southern slaveholders are keeping people controlled, not just by force and not the law, but also by the fact that they're willfully keeping people uneducated by making it illegal to read and write, and knowing very well that knowledge is power and that the easiest way to control people is by keeping them ignorant of their own history.
I guess what Byrne is saying in this philosophy is that we all have the capacity to think, and not everybody is using that capacity or aware of that or have developed those critical thinking skills. Mike, you've got a college-age son. Do you have any words of wisdom here? Is there something that you talk to your son about? How do you think this philosophy will help when thinking about people who have opposing or harmful views from your own?
It's a really interesting concept, this, and I absolutely love what you guys have been saying about it. And I suppose just to touch on a couple of those bits is, I think it was mentioned earlier, that kind of being an adult is being free of the contamination of parent and child. But kind of my interpretation, and this is one of the beautiful things about TA, is that you can look at the same kind of piece of stuff and take it in a different direction. So it's for me it's about the adult is able to navigate that inner knowledge from parent and child, and it's being able to consciously decide almost in a way that actually maybe that is appropriate, maybe that isn't appropriate, not just being guided by or just on autopilot, I suppose is the way. So that kind of came to mind when you talk about that. And then I love that TA has challenged you, Wendy, to think about the motivations of other people and not just kind of accept or discount other people's point of views, or they're not thinking or whatever. And that's actually a really difficult, challenging thing to open yourself up to say, oh, actually no, people do think that and believe it. It's not that that felt a little bit kind of, oh, I'm okay, they're not okay because they've not thought about it. Well actually no, they have thought about it, and that is what they think and believe, and that's much more worrying place to be. But that's that kind of dialogue starts to come from, isn't it? If you don't show people that respect to believe that they believe what they believe and they've thought about it, then you can't really start to affect change and things. But sorry, Rob, that wasn't really your question to me, was it? It was just thinking about my son and stuff, and thinking about Burns' kind of principle there, that everyone has the capacity to think. For me, that kind of posits that people can think independently, solve problems, take responsibility for their actions, and it fits hand in hand with the I'm okay, you're okay. Because if you don't believe that people can think, then actually you're putting them in a lower position than you already, and that then flavors all of the interactions that you start to have if you think they're not capable of rational thought, for example. So certainly while researching TA and as part of my journey through the training and things like that, I've begun to recognize, I suppose, my tendency as my son was growing and maturing, becoming his own man, that I wasn't giving him that space. I wasn't trusting that he could make his own decisions. I recognized that I would strongly advise that you take on board my wisdom and my thinking and that kind of stuff, and trying to make decisions for him or not trusting that he could make the decisions, and that only led to friction. That only leads to I come away from those kind of interactions feeling quite frustrated with that. Oh, why can't you just listen to me and understand that I know what I'm talking about here? And equally, he's come away from those interactions frustrated that, well, why can't I listen to him and understand his point of view and take on board? So, but by adopting more of a I'm okay, you're okay position, and also really believing that yes, he has a capacity to think and make his own decisions, that I can listen to his viewpoint, I can offer my information, my viewpoint, my thoughts, but absolutely trusting and supporting him to make his own choices and decisions, but also trusting that those are the right decisions for him at that point in time. But it's not my role to restrict him into what he thinks and what he's doing. There's ways that we can interact now, that we had discussions that we have that we maybe never would have had at all. And I think about I suppose things that have happened recently in America with Charlie Kirk and his shooting, and we've had quite a complex discussion about how do you hold someone's value as a human being and the tragedy of a human life being lost, versus maybe some of their views and opinions, and what those views and opinions mean to us as individuals and to wider society, and how those have been taken on and used. And that's quite a nuanced quite a nuanced discussion that we were having. That if I didn't actually believe he was capable of his own thought and stuff like that, we would never have had those kind of interactions on what is a really difficult and complex situation the more and more you dig into it.
Mm.
So it sounds like TA is changing us all. And, I think what you're saying, Mike, is that those previous two principles are in fact applicable to today. They work in tandem, and they've enabled conversations across generations, like you and your son, and have sort of maybe like served as a bridge.
Yeah, definitely. There's a case, it helps it's helped me to open my mind and my thinking, and it's helped provide a language to connect and kind of bridge some of these generational gaps.
Yeah, I like that you said that these ideas have to work together. I think I can make sense of them a bit more like that. And that they provide opportunities for exploration and for reflection. Because we don't often think about what I think about others. We just think about them. And thinking about the philosophy, I'm okay, you're okay, is like a pause button. What do I feel about other people? So therapeutically, I think it's a helpful tool.
Well, I like what Mike said about the complexity, because you then have to hold the view also of people whose views may be quite apparent to your own, and yeah, can sometimes be difficult. But as Mike said, it enables a dialogue, and that's the great thing.
Okay, I think should we keep moving through the principles then, Wendy? Do you want to help us bring it home?
Okay, then. The last one. But they're not necessarily in any order, but this is the last one. People decide their own destiny, and their decisions can be changed at any time. We talked a little bit about scripts. So scripts, according to TA, are, developed early in life. But what this philosophy is really saying is that we can redecide at any point, at any time. Generally, when people are coming into therapy, they're coming in as adults. So that's when we're seeing them. But it's saying that change is possible. Yeah. So I don't know about you guys, but to me, this one has always felt the most hopeful. Robyn, I don't know if you agree or not, but would you like to kick us off on your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is another one that I have struggled with, because it presupposes that you can change, and you only know you can change when you know. It supposes that people feel they have options and choices, and I suppose I struggle with it because I think about the context of people who might logically have the option to change, but don't feel that they can make the change. So everybody can change sounds again to me like an ideal and a great idea. And for me, it also it's not culturally sensitive. It looks at making changes in a very individualistic way. I want to do this and I'm going to do it, and that's my choice. And it doesn't look at perhaps somebody who comes from a more collective way of thinking or collective worldview, doesn't think in individual terms. I think about the choices I make, how that impacts my family, what my family wants will help decide for me what my choices will be. So I think that it's a very Western view of change and about not everybody is aware of the changes that are available to them. So it's something that I struggle with. I understand the rationale, I understand the thinking behind it, but I feel like it doesn't account for different ways of thinking and different ways of making decisions. I'd love to know what everybody else thinks about that.
It's a really interesting concept, and I love your take on it, absolutely. And it makes me kind of think about my my views and how they're kind of closely aligned with that, but maybe kind of slightly different. You know, I think it really highlights the possibility of change and the power of personal agency that is central to TA. And I find that concept of agency and flexibility really liberating and optimistic as well. You know, that as individuals, we can alter our own paths. We can make new decisions with newly found insights or with kind of changes in circumstance and things like that. You know, kind of embracing the perspective that destiny isn't fixed, that we can always develop and grow or change in some way. Maybe not necessarily always positively, but you know, change is possible, and that's something to, I suppose, kind of hold in mind. And I think, Robyn, what you've just said really kind of resonated with me in that the viewpoint could be seen as very egocentric, isn't it? It's very much, well, I can make a change, and it kind of ignores the wider society, wider culture, your environment that you're in. But perhaps that's the point, that as therapists, we shouldn't be blind to that this is a concept that we should hold in a way that means that we do consider what change could mean for not only for ourselves, but also for our clients and for the people who we're supporting through their journeys as well. You know, the principle that decisions can be changed applies not only to life decisions that you consciously make. So, you know, what school you might go to, or what career you might follow, or who you're going to date, or whatever, but also decisions can be changed speaks to all of that myriad of decisions and reactions that you make in infancy and as you're growing, that kind of shape your script and your story and how you react and your thought patterns and all this kind of stuff that is completely, kind of pre-conscious, subconscious stuff. But at some point, a decision has been made of sorts. But typically those decisions are, well, what keeps me safe? What keeps me alive? Almost at that point, it's how do I need to be? When I know when a family member is angry and violent when you're young, what do you do? How do you deal with that situation? Do you hide? Do you confront it? What does that mean? Do you mimic that behavior? And then that carries on through later life in so many different ways. And that's just an example, quite a blunt one, but hopefully you kind of get the point there. But
get what you're saying, yeah.
Thank you. And it's as we become aware of those decisions, we can begin to change that. The past affects the present, influences the future, and TA helps us have those discussions and promotes that awareness of those smaller decisions, not smaller, those earlier decisions, sorry, that then kind of ripple through.
There's
again, it's that the whole decision bit is, do you really have a choice? The principle that decisions can be changed, I think, to your point, Robyn, is only if you can make that decision. So it's do you understand the decision that you actually can make? Do you understand the implications of that decision? If you say yes to this, you're actually saying no to something else, and then the implications of this later down the line. And can you be cognizant of those to make a decision? And actually, can you even implement that decision? Are you safe and able to do that? And again, as therapists, we need to hold that and consider someone's cultural and social and economic position around decision making and change to enable those kind of things to happen.
As a trainee therapist, I do fundamentally believe that people can change, but I'm also conscious that we need to take into account that people can only change when they're aware that they can change sometimes. Yeah. So
when they're aware, when they're ready, and when it's safe, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's about the word change and measurement, because how I think, going back to assessments and tests and treatment planning and outcomes. So people may change, we might not recognize it. thinking back on education as a high school teacher, it's you may never see the results, but what people would tell me is one day, you never know, you may have made a difference in that child's life, but you might not know it now. It might be in the future. And I remember like it was about 3 or 4 years ago, I got an email from one of my students who would battle with me all the time. She, me and her got into all kinds of stuff, but she wrote me an email and she said, "I just want to thank you for believing in me. And also some of the things that you said were right." Now, this was, I don't know, like maybe 9 years later. So you never know when the change may happen. And it's also not for us to say. It's when that person feels like they've made a difference. So it might not show up on that outcome assessment. It might not show up on that treatment plan, but the person may have changed. So I do think there's something about that language. Um, and I think this is a huge topic, isn't it? I mean, Mike mentioned destiny. It's not fixed, but this is what all great books are written about: fate and free will. This is something that we as humans, from the Greeks onwards, we always, does a person have free will? And I'm just thinking about like revolutions and cultural shifts. So things are always changing. We might not always agree with the change, but things are always changing because we're all connected. I was just also reflecting on, I was just thinking about, I think maybe it was Robyn was saying about an individual person, and Obama's campaign was all about fired up and ready to go. And he got that from a little old lady, I think it was in Greenwood, in a small town in 2007. And this is what she tried to tell him. And he adopted that message. And he ended up using that fired up and ready to go in a speech in front of 100,000 people. And so was one person's voice changed everybody. He became president. So you just never know what impact you might have on somebody and on somebody's life.
Yeah, it's possible. I think also as cultural warriors, we have to question whether or not the philosophical principles translate into our own cultures, or are they rooted in a Western individualism? So I suppose I'm curious, does anyone think there is a core principle that we should add to the list that isn't there?
Yeah, and I think there's something that we need to consider, and I think it's come out throughout everything we've kind of touched on here, is that principle of, make sure I'm saying this properly, homonymy within TA.
Yeah.
So that's a growing kind of
Say that again, Mike.
I'm not sure I can, but I'll try. Homonymy. So that's homonymy is about that kind of spirit of togetherness, and it is starting to creep in now into TA 101. So that's the initial kind of 2-3 day training that you go through in kind of getting into TA, and it's a development of autonomy. So autonomy is very individualistic. It's that almost you could kind of say it's that just do it attitude. Just think for yourself, go out, you do it, you be the change, you make it happen. Whereas homonymy is more about understanding how you're interconnected and you fit in with the wider universe around you, the wider cultural kind of piece around you, that interdependence, the mutual influence and the co-regulation of people, of ideas. We're all, there's strings between all of us, and it's that kind of butterfly effect. A small thing happens here, but it ripples out over there. We're not separate islands, and you see it in other cultures as well. So there's a word that a friend of mine at work kind of mentioned as we were talking about. They said, "Oh, that sounds kind of really closely like Ubuntu," and he was saying it's kind of comes from Zulu and Swahili and cultured languages, where it's a person is a person because of other people. It's about togetherness, working together and being part of a wider collective and knowing that kind of influence and how things fit together. I think that's a really important concept, certainly in current times, that absolutely speaks to me as something that, you know, would benefit, I think, a lot of us to hold more closely.
Yeah.
Okay.
I really like that.
I do too. I think that's probably a good place to end. So in summary, we've found the 3 principles. Sometimes we've had to wrestle with them. Sometimes we've struggled with them, but overall we've found them helpful. You know, Mike's added a 4th one in there, which relates to, I think Robyn had a lovely quote.
I am because we are.
And relating to in harmony, individually we are one drop, but together we are an ocean.
Like that, yeah.
And I suppose, you know, not all of the principles I agree with, or I have different levels of agreement, but I see the value of them as a therapeutic tool, as a tool to use for reflection, and it's a great way to examine your beliefs, your attitudes, and it's useful in our practice. And as we training psychotherapists, I think it's something that we might find useful in working with clients. But I do see it as a construct to strive towards, or a journey towards, I think.
So we're going to close out with our reading list for this podcast. And next time we'll be exploring ego state's functional model. So as always, we're going to reference our TA Bible, which is TA Today, A New Introduction to Transactional Analysis by Ian Stewart and Van Joins. We really love this book because it covers everything you need to know about TA in simple terms. If you're interested in that poem that I brought up, you can read Tupac Shakur's poetry book. It's called literally The Rose That Grew from Concrete. Definitely recommend it, especially if you work with young people. And if you want something current to read, exploring these 3 principles and how it relates to TA, there is an article by Cornell, In These Dark Times, Exploring Our Values as Transactional Analysis in the Transactional Analysis Journal.
I've really enjoyed this discussion today. I want to invite you as the listener to reflect on, do you believe you're okay? Do you believe others are? And how has your own culture shaped that answer? Is there anything we shared or discussed today that made you think and pause on your own values or philosophical principles? And we look forward to seeing you next time. And don't forget, TA therapy
ain't just white.
Thanks for listening to TA Therapy Ain't Just White. We hope something in today's episode made you feel seen, curious, or just a little more connected. Whether you're a trainee, a therapist, or just therapy curious, you belong in this space. Join the conversation by following us on socials or dropping us a message. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay grounded, stay curious, and stay you.